the case if such and such were different. Now this is the mechanism, I think, and by the way, this is a biblical concept, right? Middle knowledge. For example, Jesus says to the Pharisees in regard to the miracles he performed at Capernaum. Woe to you, Capernaum, if the miracles I performed among you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, or then he says in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented in dust and ashes. Therefore, it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for them than it will be for you. I mean, look how potent middle knowledge is. God knows what would have happened. On the basis of that, he assigns relative degrees of punishment. Isn't that incredible? So the people of Tyre and Sidon or Capernaum will receive greater judgment than Sodom and Gomorrah because they had greater revelation given to them, and those other people would have repented. So based on middle knowledge, God assigns punishment. It's an amazing thing. Okay, so middle knowledge is a biblical category. Now here's what I propose to you, is that God is able, when he looks at Joseph's brothers, for example, to know what they would do in various circumstances, and on the basis of that, then chooses the set of circumstances which match what his purposes will be. So he knows, for example, what the brothers would do if Joseph had the dreams and if he didn't have the dreams. So, it's interesting. God gives those dreams to Joseph that just aggravate the brothers even more. They're already jealous. They already are angry at their brother Joseph. But the dreams make matters worse. Do you suppose God knew that would be the case when he gave Joseph those dreams? I kind of think so. I kind of think he can figure that out. Yes, it would make matters worse. And might it not be the case that God knows that because of those dreams, it will, as it were, push them over the top so that they move from just being angry with their brother and jealous about their brother, now to wanting to kill their brother. But, notice again, God knows what they would do when Reuben is present and when Reuben is absent. So when they want to kill their brother, that's the plan, is to kill their brother. Well, Reuben is present. So do they do it? No, they don't, because Reuben says, no way, you can't do that. But when the caravan comes by and they're plotting to sell Joseph, where's Reuben? He's absent. So God knows what they would do when Reuben is there and when Reuben is gone. Now, so all of those things, God can orchestrate then circumstances, knowing then what they would do in these various circumstances, assuring that they will do exactly what he wills for them to do. Yet, they do freely exactly what they do. They mean it for evil. God means it for good. They deserve the judgment they will receive for the evil action that they perform. God receives the honor and the glory for bringing about, through their evil actions, the good ends that he has designed. So indeed, I think a category to help explain how God does this work, to bring about his agency through their agency in a way in which he is not culpable with them for the evil that they do. A category that helps explain that, I think, is middle knowledge. And so you can read more about that, if you like, in God's greater glory. Okay, let's look at the next passage, Isaiah 10. This is an amazing passage where God speaks about Assyria, a nation that he has raised up for the purpose of bringing judgment against who? Who does Assyria go against in the Old Testament? That is the result of God's will. The northern kingdom. In 721 BC, Assyria comes and wipes out the northern kingdom of Israel. Later, he raises up the kingdom of who to take the southern kingdom? The Babylonians. In 586, they come against Jerusalem and the southern kingdom, Judah. But here we have Assyria who was raised up by God. Now look at how they're described. Verse 5, we read, "Woe to Assyria." Now what does that mean, by the way? This is not somebody on a horse. Whoa, slow it down. That's not that kind of woe. What kind of woe is this? You are in big trouble, Assyria, right? Woe to you, Assyria, you who are in huge trouble with God. Now look at how he describes them. "Woe to you, Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in whose hands is my indignation." Now look at that. Assyria, you are in such big trouble, you who are my rod. You who are the staff in my hand, accomplishing my will. Go figure, huh? So they are in such big trouble, they are doing exactly what God has willed for them to do. And yet, wow, they're about to be destroyed by God for what they do, even though they do exactly what God wills they do. Keep reading. Verse 6, God says, "I send Assyria against a godless nation." Who's the godless nation? His own people, Israel. "I send Assyria against a godless nation and commission it against the people of my fury to capture booty, to seize plunder, to trample them down like mud in the streets. Yet Assyria does not so intend, nor does it plan so in its heart. But rather its purpose is to destroy and to cut off many nations." Now what's the point of that, do you think? What's the point of God saying, it does not so intend? What would a paraphrase of that be? Expanding the meaning of it so it's clear. It does not so intend what? It does not so intend to bring destruction on Israel? Oh no, it intends to do that. What does it not so intend? To be doing the will of God. Assyria has no clue that God has raised her up, and what she is doing by her wicked actions in bringing judgment against Israel is actually fulfilling the ordained purpose of God for Assyria as his tool to bring just judgment against his own people. It's amazing what is happening here. Now, boy, it would be good for you to read the whole section in Isaiah 10. I don't have it all here. But after the ellipses, then, verse 12. Look at another amazing statement. "So it will be when the Lord has completed all of his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem." Now, just stop. Think of what that is saying. What is the Lord's work that he will fulfill? What is it? The work that Assyria does in bringing judgment upon Israel. So this is the wicked acts of Assyria, the acts of destroying and killing and plundering and burning and all the stuff that takes place. The wicked acts of Assyria are summarized in verse 12 as, "When the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem. He then will say to Assyria," I'm continuing on in verse 12, "I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the pomp of his haughtiness." And then he goes on to say, "For Assyria boasts that it is able to bring down any nation and conquer any kingdom." So God says, I will judge Assyria for the haughtiness, for the pride and the arrogance of their heart, even though they do exactly what God raised them to do. Now catch these last verses. Verse 15. Is the axe to boast over the one who chops with it? Is the saw to exalt itself over the one who wields it? Question, who's the axe? Who's the one who chops with it? The axe is Assyria. The one who chops with it is God. Who's the saw? Assyria. Who's the one who wields it? God. You get the point. So here God is judging Assyria for the arrogance of thinking. Very much like we saw in Daniel chapter 4 with Nebuchadnezzar. After God had fulfilled the prophecies that he gave to Daniel, and Babylon had become this great and mighty nation, Nebuchadnezzar goes to the roof of his royal palace and he says, "Is this not Babylon, the greatest city that I have built by the might of my power, for the glory of my majesty?" And God brings judgment upon him for boasting in what God did. Boy, there's a lesson in that, isn't there? Oh my goodness. All of us believers who see God work in any kind of a way through our lives, we need to develop a reflex that will quickly ascribe to God all glory for the work he has done, lest we be in the place of Assyria or Nebuchadnezzar or Herod. God sent worms, to kill him immediately when they cried out the voice of a man, the voice of a God, not of a man. And Herod took it to his heart, and God killed him instantly. So, boy, the arrogance of people before God is greatly despised by God, and he will bring judgment on it. Well, this is what he does to Assyria. But the point is this. Assyria does exactly what God raises them up to do. Assyria is the instrument in God's hand, bringing God's prophesied judgment against the northern kingdom of Israel. And then, of course, by the way, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, then came down against the southern kingdom as well. Do you remember that? He began wiping out cities in the southern kingdom. Lachish, I have been there a number of years ago, but I have seen the burned layer. It's about that thick at roughly 700 BC. They have it dated as when Sennacherib came and burned the city of Lachish. It left a huge burn layer that's in the archaeological remains that are there. So he came down, and then he came to Jerusalem and was going to wipe it out. You remember who was king in Jerusalem at the time? Hezekiah, who took that letter from Sennacherib and put it before the Lord and pleaded with God to vindicate his glory against this boastful king. And God did vindicate his glory, right? Do you remember what he did? There were 185,000 Assyrian soldiers that were encamped around Jerusalem. And God sent, now count them, one angel. One angel. I mean, the power of God. Wow. Who killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in that nighttime. Can you imagine being an Israelite living in Jerusalem, waking up the next morning and peering over the wall and seeing corpses everywhere? Cleanup. We're not told about how that happened in the Bible. What a mess. So here God brings judgment against Assyria. Sennacherib then went back to Nineveh, his capital city, and that was the beginning of the end for Sennacherib. So God brought judgment against him, even though he fulfilled exactly what God ordained him to do. Now, do you see again double agency? Who did the plundering and the devastation to Israel? Who did it? Assyria did. But is that the only answer to the question? No, my goodness, who did it? Will the axe boast over the one who wields it? So who did it? God. Okay, so we have divine agency and human agency. Human agency does wicked things. Now, the question is, which one has ultimacy?